I'm Jake Miller from the Educational Duct Tape Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect those of others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Coming up on episode 166 of the House of EdTech podcast, get ready to pass the scope. We're talking about a free tool to help check for originality of student work, and we have a great interview with Jared Covilli. Strike up the band.
Welcome to the House of EdTech podcast. I am your host, Chris Nesi. The House of EdTech explores how technology is changing the way teachers teach and the impact that technology is having in education. I discuss technology that is changing our classrooms and schools, and I share tools and tips that you can hear today and use tomorrow. You're going to hear the stories of teachers, leaders, and creators just like you. The purpose? Whether you use it or not, technology is changing the way you teach and how your students learn.
Welcome to episode 166 of House of EdTech podcast. If you're a first-timer here, welcome. I hope you enjoy your time, hope you enjoy what you hear, and you're interested in continuing to come back for even more great content. If you've been here previously, thanks for coming back. I really appreciate it. My name is Derek Larson. I'm the substitute host while Chris Nesi is away on personal leave. I'm excited to be back hosting, and I look forward to sharing the information that we have in today's episode. If you'd like to find me online, you can do that by going pretty much to any service and typing it at Lars3EB. That's me pretty much everywhere. Thanks to everybody for your kind words for the previous episode. This community is absolutely fantastic, and I'm super excited that I get to work with you all on a little more regular basis with the show right now. There's a lot happening in the show this week, but I do want to get to a few announcements, so let's hit the announcements. Coming soon, the 2020 House of EdTech App Smackdown will be here before we even know it, and we want to hear your EdTech recommendations. The goal each year is to have you and other listeners share your favorite EdTech tips, tools, apps, programs, and more. Chris prefers audio because this is a podcast, and you can submit audio by going to chrisnesi.com/feedback. You can also send Chris an email with the attached audio. Please put Smackdown 2020 in the subject, and no matter how you decide to share with Chris, get your submissions in by Tuesday, December 1st, 2020. Be sure to include who you are, where you're from, what your role in education is, and then talk about your favorite EdTech items. And also, let us know how we can connect with you. I know Chris always looks forward to the end of the year because he loves what the community shares. And I also love this episode because I learned so much from the amazing community as well. Remember, if you just send in text, you take your chances with the quality of the impression Chris does of you. So you're better off just sending in some audio. Hey, there are still a few more limited edition House of EdTech 3D printed coins available for a one-time donation of $25. You can get yours by going to chrisnesi.com/coin. This is powered by the buymeacoffee.com website. So if you're interested, check out chrisnesi.com/coin to pick up your very own limited edition House of EdTech 3D printed coin. For this episode's EdTech Thought, I have a question to begin. Have y'all ever heard of hashtag PassTheScopeEDU? PassTheScopeEDU was an idea that posed a question. What would happen if educators came together to share their thoughts and viewpoints on a single topic using the Periscope app? It was started back in spring of 2014 via a discussion in the EduMatch Voxer group. And the first scopes actually happened on April 21st, 2014. And it has seen some amazing growth as well as a bit of a slowdown in recent times. The Pass the Scope EDU community grew out of 5 initial scopers. Valerie Lewis, who's online on Twitter at IamVLewis, Dr. Sarah Thomas, online at Sarah the Teacher, and that's SarahDateechur, Nicole Taylor at KNIKOLE, Dr. Tatul Natoya on Twitter at TOUTOULENTOYA, and myself. We had some discussions and said, what would happen if we did this? What if we tried? And Periscope was still fairly new, and we thought, let's give it a shot. And on that first event, that first day of April 21st, 2014, the 5 of us jumped on it all at different times, and we scoped for about 5 to 7 minutes, and one would go, and then we'd pass the scope, if you will, to the next person. And they would go, and then we went all the way through. And it was an incredible thing. And what we found was that the community grew and grew, and people wanted to be involved. And for a long time, it was just all over. I mean, it was very, very involved. They were scoping at conferences and sharing out video of keynotes and of speakers, and it was an amazing opportunity. In fact, I was able to go to ISTE 2017 partially because of Pass the Scope EDU, and met up with some amazing educators. Honestly, this community has been one of the best parts about education for me and the online PLN world, because I've made such great connections. Pass the Scope EDU is a great community. Now, why am I bringing this up? Why is this my thought? As I'm recording this, we've just had that third Thursday. Pass the Scope happens every third Thursday of the month. And we're kind of in a rebuilding stage. And I actually wasn't planning on scoping today. But what happened was our fearless leader, Chris Nesi, all of a sudden he was on scoping. And I thought, Chris has never been on here. And I watched what Chris had to say. And if you get a chance, go on Twitter and search for hashtag #PassTheScopeEDU and go and find what Chris had to say. He kind of told the story about how the theme for this month was give me a break. And some people took it in a negative light, and some took it more positive. Chris took it in a way of saying, hey, I had to have a break of some sort to get through these wild times. And kind of how I came to be on the show. I kind of said, let me jump in and take the show for you, Chris. That way it doesn't have to sit vacant. Pass the Scope EDU is a chance for educators to jump on and share their thoughts on a topic. And it opens up such a great dialogue. This is a community that I think every educator should take the time to jump into and to learn more. Start off by going to Twitter and doing a search for hashtag #PassTheScopeEDU. Watch what's going on. And if you think, hey, that sounds interesting, I want to be involved, there is a Boxer chat that you can join. And we actually there's discussion that goes on in there. Or you can just go to the spreadsheet, which is the sign up spreadsheet. I'll link it in the show notes, where you can go and you can pick a time when you want to scope. Up at the very top of the spreadsheet, there are different time zones. So you can kind of see, okay, if it's at 12 Eastern, what time is it all across the rest of the country? And if you're outside of the U.S., you're welcome to join. You may have to adjust and kind of figure out the time for you when that actually works. Why do I bring this up, though? Honestly, the Pass the Scope EDU community is amazing. And I think it's something that can really help the listeners here of the podcast. So do yourself a favor. Go check it out and see what you think. Take a look and see if this is a community of educators that can help you. And more than that, see if you can share some of your story and help to put out that narrative that you want to be a part of. You can look for hashtag #PassTheScopeEDU on Twitter, or you can go to passthescopeedu.com for more information. And this has been our EdTech thought for the show. Our Our featured content in this episode is an interview with my friend Jared Covilli, who is the technology trainer for the Utah Education Network, or UEN, which is a state organization that does so many things here for the state of Utah. I wanted to talk to Jared and have him share some of the things that he has seen in his time in this role. But more than that, some of the things he's seen that's happened in Utah during this COVID time, and kind of get some ideas that can help the listeners understand and kind of figure out how can we kind of work through this. I know everyone kind of has their own style, their own way, but I love to learn from others. I love to bring that on. And so Jared came and shared a lot of great information. So without further ado, let's get to that interview. We have Jared Covilli from Utah Education Network. Jared's one of my good buddies. I've known Jared for many years. He is an amazing educator and a great trainer. He does all sorts of awesome things with EdTech. So Jared, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are and how they can find you online.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that being your friend means that I get to do favors for you. That's exciting. But I am happy to be on the podcast today and hope that all the listening audience gets to hear about some of the cool stuff we're doing in Utah. As Derek mentioned, I'm an EdTech trainer for the Utah Education Network. I've been doing that since 2003. So I started teaching people how to use PowerPoint, and now we do all kinds of amazing things online with all kinds of interesting and cool gadgets. So I've seen a lot of changes in the EdTech world over the last 17 years. So it's an exciting time to be in EdTech. It's exciting to be able to see so much of the technology that we've been preaching for years now being used every day in classrooms and homes across the country. Some of the things that I've been involved with over the past several years, I've been heavily involved with ISTE and the local affiliate here in Utah. Our organization is called USET, which stands for Utah Coalition for Educational Technology. And we've been able to bring some pretty cool things to Utah, including an annual conference that has about 1,800 participants in it. And then we also are heavily involved in the EdCamp movement, and we've been involved in EdCamps from the northern part of our state all the way down to the southern part of our state. And each week I help moderate the weekly Twitter chat for the state of Utah, which is called Utah Ed Chat. And along the way, I've been involved in speaking and writing and doing a lot of fun stuff with products like Google and cloud-based tools. So I've been really fortunate that I've had a lot of opportunity to share the EdTech message across the country.
Jared, you are seriously all over the place, and I love that about you. I want to dig in a little bit on some of those pieces there. So you mentioned that you are part of UEN, but you also spent time as a classroom teacher. What did you teach? And tell us kind of a little bit about your background there, not only just in the classroom, but also how did you kind of move yourself into using the EdTech tools as a teacher yourself?
So I started out as a high school English teacher, and I was in the classroom for about 4 years. I taught all kinds of different subjects, but one of my passions was I was heavily involved in the literary magazine program, which meant that we had to produce an annual book full of student poetry and artwork. And that was kind of a cool thing that kind of got the tech bug into me a little bit, because we got to use programs like InDesign, and we got to do layout for the book and all that kind of stuff. One of the things that I was pretty involved with early on was the school district that I worked at here in Utah had a technology grant program, and the applicants got to have 6 laptops that probably had the processing speed of your very first cell phone. But it was awesome. In the classroom, we got to use those. We didn't have to go down to the computer lab anymore. And so I was part of that pilot group. And it kind of led me to where I got a master's in instructional technology. Pretty soon, I realized that I really wanted to help teachers learn how to use technology in their classrooms, because I saw the impact that it had on my students. And so that's when I made the transition from working in a school to working for basically as a tech trainer for the state of Utah.
That's amazing. Honestly, I think that's one of the best parts about this is I think it often begins with a teacher, just one teacher saying, hey, I want to try something different. I want to try something new. And then once that person gets excited, we often want to share with someone else and kind of get the ball going. And so you were able to take that and not just sharing across the hall or next door, but you've actually, you moved that into a position where you were helping not just even one district, but parts of the entire state, and you've actually been all over the state of Utah specifically helping teachers. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we have in Utah, as Derek mentioned, I work for the Utah Education Network. We're a state agency that actually provides internet resources and the backbone for the internet for all the school buildings throughout the state of Utah. So we not only provide the connectivity so that schools can get onto the network, but we provide all the resources to help classrooms once they're online. So we help them with all kinds of technology, integration strategies. Like I kind of mentioned, I kind of got my start teaching things like PowerPoint and Dreamweaver back in the day. And who would have imagined that we would go where we've gone today? So it's been pretty cool to go throughout the small rural districts where I've been in districts where they have everything from grades 7 through 12 in the high school to large school districts that, have over 80,000 students in them. So we've really kind of run the whole spectrum here in Utah.
Yeah, it's quite impressive, honestly. When I look back and I see what I've gone through as an educator. I mean, I started in Washington County, and Washington County is a suburban district, I guess you would say. Yet even that, we're tiny down here compared to other districts in the state. I mean, Alpine District is, like you said, like 80,000 people, just massive. A large district. And then we've also got the small districts. And when I spent time at SCDC, I got to see some of that firsthand as well. And you actually came down and helped and worked with us at SCDC as we worked with some of those tiny districts where we had some schools that were like K-12, like 25 kids. And it was amazing. Some of those great things I saw, and looking back and seeing all the amazing things that the Utah Education Network, or UEN, does. A lot of Utah educators don't realize just how deep it is. But sometimes they just think about just the training, which is what you're part of that. But like you said, there's a whole technical side of it that basically, in a way, UEN acts like the broker for the ISPs for the district. So that all comes through UEN and kind of helps them out. I think it's amazing.
Well, and Utah has been pretty visionary as far as setting this system up, because this happened in the early 90s. I mean, really, we started out with kind of telecommunication projects where you could dial in and you could have classrooms that met remotely. We used video fairly early in the game. And once the internet became robust enough that we could do these classes online, boy, everything started to change. Kids who lived in like one of those districts you mentioned that maybe has 25 students in a K-12 class, a K-12 school, they could get access to the same classes that a kid could take that's in suburban Salt Lake City. They could have the same teacher teach both those groups of kids. It's just really amazing, some of the things we've done.
Well, and it really kind of helps to play into some of that equity piece, right? Where you look at a small district, students they don't have the catalog of classes that a larger school would have. But due to this technology piece, they're able to do that. And I love that that's one of the awesome benefits that Utah has, where we may not always be the front of every line of everything in education, but this is an area where we're leading the way in many of these places, and I absolutely love it. And I love that that's one of the things that you do. And in fact, that's how we met, I believe. I think you were down doing a training in Washington one summer, and I got to know you from that. And I just realized, okay, this is a guy I've got to stick close to. And I feel very lucky that I've been able to work with you on some of these other projects. So,
well, I feel the same way about working with you. So that's great.
You also mentioned one of the big things, and one of the places that you and I really connected was over the USET board. And the USET would be the Utah Coalition of Educational Technology, or as you said earlier, it's the ISTE affiliate for Utah. You've been a part of that organization and that board of directors for many years. How has that time there helped you in your day job of helping other teachers, but also how's it helped you as an educator yourself and making improvements and learning and growing for yourself?
One of the things I love so much about being involved with technology is it really is a big tent where we're trying to bring more and more people in, because we know that it will impact student achievement. We know that it makes teachers more excited to teach, and it makes kids more excited to learn. So when over the 12 years that I've been on the USET board, we've seen our conference grow by leaps and bounds. Really, we started out we were lucky if we could get 700-800 people at our conference. And like I said, at our last few conferences, we've been averaging over 1,800 people. And that's a lot to do with the excitement that technology brings to classrooms in our state and across the country. But what I love so much about working with the board in our state is it's an all-volunteer board. These are people who come and spend their time trying to improve education in Utah after they've already gone through their 9-to-5 job. And it's been awesome to see how our vision and how this state's vision has really taken off in the last probably 3 or 4 years, really, to really become a place where when the coronavirus shut down our schools, your audience may not know this, but many states shut down school for till the end of the school year. And in Utah, we said we need 2 days to get teachers up, ready to go, and we'll start next week. We closed our schools on a Thursday or on a Friday, and by Wednesday of the following week, most school districts across Utah had moved to being virtual school districts where we taught kids online through the end of the school year.
If I'm not mistaken, didn't all that happen during the USET conference last year, where basically you were at the conference as the state was coming down and making, or is that right before? Or the timeline was kind of hazy in my mind, but I want to say that the conference was happening kind of as things were shutting down or almost going to shut down. And I can only imagine that the conference really helped to kind of excite teachers to say, okay, I'm going to have to do this. I've learned some awesome things here at this event.
Yeah. And one of the goals of our conference has always been that the things that you learn at our conference on, let's say on a Friday, you should be able to implement something that you learned the next week in your classroom. And so this is a pretty extreme example where we kind of changed the whole classroom, but a lot of teachers have been preparing for this for a long time. We've been heavily involved in technology endorsement programs where we have hundreds of teachers every year that certify for our state endorsement as an ed tech specialist, as a teacher. So they show that they understand how technology can have an impact on their classroom, not just the click here and click there and all the gadgets that we have in the classroom, but they really have a good pedagogical foundation of what technology can do to improve learning.
Yeah, and you're involved in quite a few specific projects within UEN, but I know one of those projects specifically is actually UEN's Homeroom podcast. And I know typically it seems like your schedule is about a couple times a month, maybe 2 or 3 times a month, but it felt like during the shutdown, you guys were in some places almost daily during the week. You were putting out 3 to 4 or 5 episodes a week. And I was just amazed at how much you were doing.
Yeah, one of the things that we felt like we could contribute to teachers during the first part of the pandemic, we were trying to do things maybe for the first time, and we wanted to provide a voice for teachers so they could share what they were doing, so we could have principals and district administrators and librarians and the whole gamut of people in education. We could share their stories about how they were adjusting and what they were doing to make kids feel safe, how they could help kids feel like they could go on, and to kind of give that voice to the teachers that sometimes we don't often hear. Our podcast has been around for, we're in our 3rd season now. We've got about 70 episodes of our podcast. But as you mentioned, during the first part of the shutdown and the pandemic, we really had switched from being about a bi-monthly, so every couple of weeks, right? We'd put out an episode, and we switched immediately to telling three plus episodes per week. And even now we've moved from being every other week to every week on our podcast, just because we just want to continue to let Utah teachers hear from their peers and to share the stories of the great things that are happening in education across our state. It's been really eye-opening and very inspirational to hear the stories of great education and great educators in Utah.
And I'll make sure we have a link to that podcast in the show notes for this week's episode, because I think it's very powerful for teachers. I mean, even to look back right now, I mean, we're still in the midst of this pandemic, and there are still many schools across the country that are 100% digital. And a lot of the things that were shared, especially the end of your last season, there was a lot of tips and tricks and a lot of ideas from teachers specifically saying, here's what I'm doing, here's how this is working. I think can be very beneficial for anyone. And I think you're going to want to go and check that out, because there was such good stuff in there. And your co-host on that, Danny Sloan, is awesome. She's a lot of fun. I'm sure she's quite the fireball. I'm sure you guys have a lot of fun on that podcast.
I am well aware that this is Danny's world, and she's just allowing me to live in it. So when we do the podcast, I'm basically her caddy, and I just tell her which club to use, and she's the one doing all the driving there. So we have a good time. We hope that people enjoy kind of our take on education, and we hope that they can laugh, smile, and learn something.
And I also love you've got a producer for your show that he came in, I believe in season 2, if I'm not mistaken. But he also, Fernando, he kind of jumps in occasionally, and he gets to be that third host at times, which I also love. I love that dynamic between you and Danny, but I love when Fernando is able to jump in there, and we get like, oh, here's another voice, and here's another totally different perspective, because he's not an educator by trade, but he's got some great nuggets of awesomeness, I think.
Oh, Fernando Lara is our producer that you're talking about, and he brings a whole different element to the podcast. I will say our production value went up dramatically when he became our executive producer, and his ability to just bring different perspectives and to help us kind of see more of the technology side of things in addition to the pedagogy side. It's been great. It's been great to learn from him, as well as to have him share a lot of his personality with our listeners.
Well, and I also love that he also has a bit of a different perspective also. He comes in as the parent view sometimes, because he's not been a teacher, but he does have children in education. And so I love some of that kind of piece that he kind of comes in, like I said, totally different view, but he often has that parent role that, even though many of us in education, we might be parents, sometimes we kind of side more with the educator piece and not so much the parent piece. And I love that aspect of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, most teachers wear a lot of different hats, but when we get talking shop about education, we tend to focus in on the teacher side. So it is good to hear from the parent side as well.
So another piece you mentioned in your introduction that I definitely want to pull out is with the Ed Camp idea. I remember when I was on the USET board at the time when we decided that we needed to have an Ed Camp happening in Utah. And I believe you were one of the people that was one of the big pushers saying, hey, we've got to have this. This is all over the place. We don't have one of these in Utah yet. And you kind of were the driving force behind that. And it's been a couple of years now. And we went from having a single Ed Camp for the entire state of Utah, which for those people on the East Coast that are listeners that are not aware, Utah's not the largest state, but it's still pretty big. I mean, you can literally drive from my house in the southwest corner up to the farthest north tip of Utah, and that'll take you anywhere from like 6 to 8 hours. I mean, really, it's a very vast state, and we were able to have one Ed Camp for the entire state. And now we look at it, and there have been multiple Ed Camps, not just multiple events for the same camp, but we're actually now on 3-4 different Ed Camps happening in the state that were happening fairly regularly before the COVID, right?
Yeah, no, we started out with just one statewide Ed Camp, and now we really have 3 very established Ed Camps that happen in different corners of our state so that we can reach a more regional audience. But it also helps them get more involved, and we love it when teachers want to get involved in their local area to share the good word of education and to help strengthen professional learning among teachers. So like you mentioned, when we started Ed Camp, it was back in 2014. It really was just happenstance, to be honest with you. One day I was on Twitter as I was preparing for a conference that I was going to present at, and I started seeing a lot of the hashtag EdCamp popping up everywhere. And it really got me thinking, I've heard of this, but I don't really know a ton about it. And so I spent the better part of the morning researching it. And immediately it just hit me like, why don't we have one of these in our state? And so we set about to do one. And honestly, the first Ed Camp I ever attended was one that I helped put together. And it just really shows you the power of that model of learning, that once you give people an opportunity to get together with their peers and to share ideas about education, teachers are on board. And it's just a great way for them to learn the content that they want to learn about from people that they know, that they trust.
Yeah, and what I like too about Ed Camp personally is that I may not know that person directly, but I know that they're an educator. And I think sometimes in education, we'll have a consultant will come in, and nothing against consultants. I love many. I've worked with many, and I've loved most of them. But I at least personally enjoy learning from and with people who are in the trenches, just like I am. They're a teacher in the classroom, or they're a librarian working in a library, and they're not so far removed. And so I think that's one of the powers of EdCamp is it's kind of an everyman's conference, because no one person has taken hours and hours and hours prepping and beautiful slides, but yet they're just coming in. And it really is almost like a physical manifestation of a Twitter chat.
Yeah. And one thing that I like to say about these events, whether it's Twitter chats or EdCamps, I really believe that this is what teachers want the faculty room to feel like, or the faculty lounge, right? When you go into a place where you're around your peers, you want to share ideas about what's going well in your classroom. You want to be able to ask questions about things that you need help with. And you just want to be able to share the amazing things that are going on in your classroom. And I think EdCamps are such a great way to do that. You know, if I show up at an EdCamp and I kind of want to learn about a topic for the day, I have the ability to add that to the discussion. And before you know it, there's a session that's going to be talking about some of the things that I want to learn about. Really, the neat part about this is we found so many different ways to connect and build our professional learning networks, right? I mean, it's whether you're online using social media tools like Twitter chats, or you can go in person and meet up with colleagues, like you say, some you haven't met before and others that you've known for years. And we just try to facilitate ways that these conversations can happen where teachers can feel empowered to learn.
Typically in Utah, November, the beginning of November is typically EdCamp Utah time. What's going to happen this year? Obviously, COVID has totally affected classrooms. How is everything going to happen this year with the EdCamp conferences within the state?
Yeah, like you mentioned, I mean, our response to the pandemic is we do not want to lose these great learning opportunities for teachers. And so, like everything else, we've decided that we're going to figure out a way to do this virtually. So we're going to be holding, it'll still be called EdCamp Utah, because we're going to bring together teachers from across our state. Like you mentioned, that 6 hours or that 8 hours from the most southernmost part of our state to the most northern part of our state. We're going to bring teachers together in a virtual environment where we're still going to hold an EdCamp. And we're going to use tools that will allow us to get input from the teachers, where we can still do virtual discussion rooms, where we can have sessions where teachers can still use that grassroots way of putting down what they want to learn about. And we can put something together pretty much within a few minutes, where we can have discussion happening about topics that those teachers want to learn about. Even though we won't be in person, we'll find ways that we can do this and bring people together virtually.
And in order to do that, we obviously, pull back the curtain a little bit. I'm actually working with you as part of that planning group, because one of the things I've taken the lead with the EdCamp St. George, and I really am trying to push that and help that conference, that EdCamp to grow. So I'm a part of this planning committee for the whole statewide virtual conference EdCamp. But we had to find a tool that would allow us to do that. Do you want to speak a little bit about that tool and kind of how we were able to make that work? Because any kind of a tool of this size, there's going to be some costs, unfortunately. And do you want to share a little bit about some of the background behind the scenes of how we were able to make this and how we're planning to make this work?
Yeah, I mean, we've done several different virtual events, and districts have done that across our state. And one of the challenges is, how do you find the right platform? You know, we've got some teachers who are in districts that are Microsoft districts, so they want to use Microsoft Teams. We've got other districts that use a statewide license that we have for WebEx. And then we've also got other teachers who jumped on the Zoom bandwagon because it's a very accessible tool. But the challenge that you run into when you're trying to host an event like this is the participants can't keep jumping from one platform to the next, right? Where one session's in Google Meet, the next one's in Zoom. So we were investigating a tool that we could use to kind of bring everybody together. Now, we're still in the planning process, but one that we're exploring right now is a web service called HoET166 that really does kind of provide you that one stop where you can bring together lots of sessions. You can have keynotes. You can even have vendors if you wanted to. Now, we're not personally going to do that with the EdCamp model because that's not really the way that one goes. But tons of opportunities to bring hundreds of people into a virtual session where you can have them basically the same way you would move from classroom to classroom in an in-person conference. You can do the same thing in a virtual conference where you move from one session to another virtually. And it's something that we're excited to try. I mean, none of us have ever really used it much before, but it seems to be the right concept to help us bring people together where the technology doesn't become a barrier, but it hopefully will make it easier for people to learn.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think, like I said, that's very important to mention that this is one of those times when we're kind of all being guinea pigs with this service, because I don't think anybody really nobody in the state has used this service before for a conference. Are you aware of someone?
I mean, there's been a couple smaller things that I've heard about. That's where we kind of learned about it, but nothing on this scale.
Yeah, and the thing with this as well is whenever you have to go to a platform like this, there's obviously going to be a cost, and I know that's cost that can be prohibitive for some people, some other groups to try to use a tool like this. But we were able to pull this off thanks in large part to UEN and becoming basically a major sponsor to help us with this. If I'm not mistaken, I think the idea is possibly to also use this to help with the USET conference in the spring. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, once you find tools that work, boy, we want to maximize how many different ways we can use them. So we're hoping that whatever platform we do settle on, that we'll be able to use it not only at the EdCamp this fall, but also for our statewide ISTE affiliate conference, the USET conference in the spring. And I've been on different calls with other ISTE affiliates from across the country, and they're all looking at the same things, like how can we move these in-person conferences that we've done for decades to virtual platforms? And so it's really the challenge, but it's also the opportunity for us to see how can we make this space work better. I mean, so many of us talk about blended learning environments in our classrooms, and now we're seeing the fruition of this as blended learning environments for our own professional learning. And that's an incredible thing to think about is, we've kind of had the online phase where we've just done everything exclusively online, but now we're going to start to see how we can do these blended environments where we can have in-person and online at the same time. Yeah,
I find that's incredible. I love that idea. The fact that I as a teacher, I found as many ways as I could to integrate these digital tools and Google Meets and mystery Skype calls and all these different things. But it was never like the focus as it is now, partially because it's kind of had to happen with the pandemic when it first hit in the spring and all the schools were closed in Utah. And now so many of them have opened at least partially. And so I think it's awesome that we're able to kind of continue to push that limit and say, well, we're going to continue learning and really model that perspective, because I found when I work with teachers sometimes as well, they forget what it's like to be uncomfortable as they're learning. Now, maybe not so much right now, thanks to the situation we've been placed in, but they have no problem having their kids push and kind of move around. And I think it's good for teachers to have that little bit of like, okay, yeah, this is a little bit uncomfortable. How do I push through this? And teachers have been so incredible. I think every teacher that I'm aware of across the state and probably across the world actually has had to really step into places that are quite unknown. And I dare say that the profession has grown leaps and bounds since last fall.
Well, there's no doubt that in our classrooms, we talk a lot about having growth mindset, but I think it'd be safe to say that some of us haven't always had that for our own professional learning, that we kind of go to our niche or find our comfort zone. And so the last several months have really pushed us to stretch our limits, to see what's possible and to really try some new things. And I think, like you say, what an awesome example we're setting for our kids, that we can do that too as their teachers, that we will stretch ourselves, we will try new things, and we can be successful. I think that's one of the big lessons that I think I'm pulling away from the pandemic in education is that we're doing things almost unheard of because of necessity, but also because we need to innovate. I really don't think that when the pandemic is over, that we will go back to the same way of doing school. Like, I can't imagine that we won't take some of these great lessons that we've learned and some of these amazing tools that we figured out how to use in our classrooms, and we won't see a more cohesive strategy for blended learning where we can do digital days in addition to in-person days. Districts won't shy away from that the way they did maybe a year ago.
Well, I certainly hope not. And I think you're right on that. Although I have to say, I think there are many students and probably even a few teachers that are now very nervous for the future of our beloved snow days, because I think if nothing else, maybe this has shown maybe there's not a need for a snow day anymore. And I know there are many students and, again, probably many teachers that I think we secretly like those days because it forces us to.
You ever had a snow day down there in St. George? Come on, Derek.
Actually, we have. My first couple of years teaching, we actually had two different ones because.
What'd you get, a skiff of snow?
Well, here's the problem. We don't own any snowplows in southern Utah. We have, I think, 2 or 3 for the entire county. And one of them is always assigned to the freeway. And my first year teaching, the Thursday and Friday before Christmas break, it dropped about 4 inches on us. And it literally closed down the whole town. And it was so bad. It was sad because the 3rd grade students at my school that year, every year they would do a Christmas play, and they would always perform it that Thursday and Friday before we went to Christmas break. And so they weren't able to do their Christmas program. And so we actually did the Christmas program in January when we came back, and it was very sad, but also part of me was like, you know what, this is quite historic. I don't know that this will happen. And like I said, it's only happened a couple of times, and everybody up north always gives us grief. But honestly, if you don't have it, you don't have it. And so a snow day is not always the same amount of snow for some people.
Well, the teachers in Michigan are laughing right now at us, but I will say that having a Christmas program in January is a pretty unique event. There's no doubt about it. No,
it's definitely. And you mentioned that at Michigan. I remember one year we did a mystery Skype call with a friend of mine in Michigan. And afterwards, our students would just talk and kind of share about where they're at. And it was in January. And the students in Michigan said, oh, yeah, we do inside recess because we can't go outside. And my kids said, well, why not? And they said, well, there's like 8 feet of snow out there. And my kids' jaws dropped because we had literally just come in from the most beautiful, maybe a little bit chilly, but the most beautiful day with blue skies and everything. And when we ended the call, I told my kids, don't ever take for granted the weather we have here because it doesn't happen anywhere else. And so, yes, I have been made fun of many times because of the snow and lack thereof.
Well, maybe the snow days are an endangered species, but boy, we're sure doing some great things to fill their time and to help them learn even when the weather's not so great.
I agree. So, Jared, before we close, I appreciate all your time. I hate to steal all your time from you this evening, but thank you for giving me a few minutes and giving our listeners a little bit of taste of what's awesome that's happening here in Utah and kind of some of the inner workings of how the Utah Education Network supports its teachers and its technology throughout the state. If you could give me maybe 2 or 3 things that you've picked up just since this COVID pandemic hit, where teachers, like you said, like we've mentioned earlier, have been pushed to the limits and then some.
Well, a few things that I've learned, and a lot of these things have come from talking to teachers on our podcast. You know, one of the biggest things that I saw that really affected teachers, it wasn't that they didn't feel like they were capable of teaching students in a distance learning environment. It's just how much they missed the kids. It's how much they wanted to make sure that their kids knew that they loved them, and how much they wanted the kids to know that they had faith in them and they trusted them. They knew they could be successful whether they were in person or online. And one of the things that it really struck me was how much the teachers throughout our state spend time building relationships with their students. And the most fascinating part of moving from in-person to a digital environment is the people that spent the time building relationships in person. Guess what they did when they moved online? They kept those relationships going. Those kids knew whether they saw their teacher in a Zoom room or whether they heard their voice on the phone or even looked out their window and saw some of their teachers driving by and waving and honking, that they were loved and that they could be successful. That's a huge takeaway, especially for some of our youngest learners, all the way up through our seniors in high school, to know that they weren't forgotten. Huge for us.
Well, and I love that you mentioned not only just our youngest kids, because I think often we think, oh yeah, it's the K2, the K3 students or the elementary teachers. They're the ones that are the most caring and loving with their kids. And as you get older, teachers kind of sometimes they don't have that same ability to connect with their students. But I love that you brought out the point that, you know, it's K-12. I mean, those older kids, I feel like I'm now in a middle school, and I feel like the older the kids are that I work with, the more they need that connection and knowing that there's an adult who fully trusts them and is willing to do anything to help them grow and learn. I feel like it's even more important than even at the elementary level, which it's crucial there. But I feel like in the secondary, it's just, you can't not have it.
Well, and like I said, to see principals and administrators and teachers in those secondary schools driving around and putting signs in people's yards that say, "We love our students," or, "Our students are heroes too." And just amazing things to see how teachers reached out to the kids. Another thing that I really took away from the pandemic and what it looked like to learn online, one of the big things that we try and do all the time is we're always worried about being judged about how rigorous our classes are. And we need rigor in our classrooms, do not get me wrong. But one of the things that I saw when you shift from an in-person environment to an online or a virtual platform is you cannot try to cram 8 hours of content that you would do in person into the same space in the virtual environment. So what it forced our teachers to do was to really assess, what am I teaching? What are our learning goals? And what needs to happen today for the kids to learn the concepts that they need to learn? And we really narrowed it down to not trying to teach a number of hours, but to try and teach the most important concepts and make sure that our students walked away knowing what was essential. And that's something we don't often get a chance to do in our classrooms or in our curriculum planning, is to really focus in on what is the most essential thing that has to happen today. And when I saw teachers doing that, again, that really showed me that learning didn't just change location, meaning from in-person to virtual, but it changed kind of our focus. And it really made us think about what's the most important thing we're doing.
Well, and they always talk about, with education, you measure seat time and the fact that you've got to be in the seat, like you said initially. But I've always heard that that's the wrong end of the person. That's the wrong end of the student. We need to be measuring their head and what their head can do and what they can do. And I will say, if nothing else comes out of this, if teachers get nothing else from these experiences, I hope that they can help administrators and district officials and state officials to recognize that, you know what, that idea is got to be thrown out the window. It doesn't have to be a matter of how much time. It really needs to be more based on proficiency levels. And this student can show me they're capable and their understanding of these topics and these essential items. And that therefore shows me that they should be able to progress. It's not a matter that they've sat in their desk for every day for 180 days, but instead that they've demonstrated proficiency in these different skills. So that's one thing I think, honestly, for me personally, I would love to see teachers and students be able to gain from these crazy times.
And I think they are. I really do think that we really have narrowed our focus to just being more impactful in what we do.
Well, Jared, again, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you being a part of the House of Ed Tech podcast. And before I let you go, though, I'd like for you to, again, tell people how they can find you online. And if there's anything that you'd like to push out or tell us about, take this couple of minutes real quick and let us know where they can find you, because I guarantee that the listeners here are going to say, okay, this is an educator I need to keep following along because he's got some good thoughts and some good ideas.
Do you know, probably the best way to connect with me online is through Twitter. My Twitter handle is my last name, @Covilli, spelled Covili. That's probably the best way to reach me. You'll find me involved in a lot of different aspects of Twitter chats and sharing ideas from UEN there. And if you want to listen to the podcast, you can find us in any of the major platforms. We're in iTunes and we're in Google Podcasts and on Spotify. It's the UEN Homeroom podcast, or you can go visit the website, uen.org/homeroom.
Yeah, it's honestly, it's a great show. Not just because I've been able to be a guest on that show, but in general, it's a fabulous show. I feel bad because I think
February 2019 was particularly good, right, Derek?
I was a very good episode. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, that was a great one. That was actually post Ed Camp St. George, and so we were on a educational high at that moment. It was beautiful, but the whole thing is great. And like I said, especially those nuggets that happened during that pandemic, I think that was probably some of the best podcasting that I've been able to listen to. And I think anybody who will take the time and kind of listen through those episodes specifically are going to learn and catch some nuggets that are just awesome.
Well, good. I hope everyone gets a chance to check it out.
All right. Thanks so much, Jared, for being here.
Thanks, Derek.
For the House of EdTech recommendation, we're actually going to go back to Jared Covilli, and he's going to share what he likes to call in his podcast a lazy teacher tech tip. So, Jared, what do you got for us?
Yeah, when Danny and I are sharing tech tips, we want things that you can use immediately that don't really require a whole lot of prep work. We just want things that work. One of the things that I've been playing around with quite a bit, I spend a lot of time in Google. And one of my new favorite tools here are called originality reports, and they're part of Google Docs. In this tool, you can actually, as a teacher, you can analyze student writing to see if it's authentic. And so you can, when a student turns in a paper, once originality reports are turned on, it will actually go through and scan that document to see if it can find references that look like something that's already online. And it will kind of highlight or report anything that looks suspicious so that you can evaluate it as the teacher. I think it's a great tool for us, as so many of us do not have the time to really do a good plagiarism check. But I think this is a great way for you to be able to quickly see if your students just made a simple citation mistake, or if they maybe have a little bit more malicious intent and you want to just double check and let them know that you've seen their work and you expect them to cite their sources. So originality reports is part of the G Suite for Education. It's a great tool. I hope you have had a chance to use it. If you haven't, go check it out.
Awesome. I love that, because I think there's a number of tools that you can pay for and use to get that plagiarism checker, that originality checker, but this is built into Google. So is it automatically enabled by default, or is that something that a system administrator has to enable, or is it like an add-on? Where would they find that?
So I think this has to be turned on at the building level. So I don't think it's on by default, but this is something that can be integrated into, like I say, Google Docs. For those of you using Google Classroom, it can be part of assignments that are turned in and submitted there. And even for those of you who use other LMSs like Canvas or Schoology or Turnitin or different things like that, this is a system that can be turned on in the new Google Assignments as well. So lots of different ways to have access to this, but a really simple tool that can help you as a teacher to ensure that students are turning in their own work.
Awesome. I love that. So guys, if you want to learn more about that, we'll have a link in the show notes about it. But again, you may have to reach out to your building level administrator for your G Suite tools, or maybe possibly even somebody at the district level. But I think this is a great tool that, if it's not already enabled, should definitely be enabled. So Jared, thanks so much for a great House of EdTech recommendation, or as, like I said, you like to call it, a lazy teacher tech tip. Great.
No doubt this is for the laziest tech teacher there is.
Awesome. Thanks, Jared. Congratulations to this episode's House of EdTech VIP, Valerie Lewis. Valerie is online on Twitter at IamVLewis. Valerie is a former special education teacher, and she's currently an assistant principal in the Atlanta suburbs. Valerie is the inspiration behind and one of the founding members of Past the Scope EDU that we discussed earlier in the show. Val is an incredible person who is full of personality and energy, and is always trying to find ways to move education along. She's a devoted wife and a wonderful mother. I've known Val for many years, but we have never actually met in person. But I definitely look forward to meeting her sooner than later. You should follow Valerie on Twitter at IamVLewis and be ready for some great educational thoughts, ideas, and just great life nuggets. Congratulations again to Valerie Lewis. You are this episode's House of EdTech VIP. thank you for checking out this episode of the House of Ed Tech. I hope you enjoyed it. Had a lot of fun talking to Jared. Had a lot of fun sharing about Pass the Scope and about Valerie, our VIP great friends. We'd like to keep the conversation going. I'd love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on the information and resources shared in this and every episode. For this episode, go to chrisnessy.com/166 or send me a message by going to chrisnessy.com/feedback. And if you enjoy the House of Ed Tech, why don't you do two things? First off, go tell somebody about the show. Tell somebody online, tell them in your hall, tell them in your school, tell your neighbors, tell your friends, tell somebody about the show. If you do share on social media, be sure to use the hashtag House of Ed Tech. You can also become an awesome supporter. And many thanks go out to Mr. Anthony Arnaud of the New Teacher Podcast at newteacher.org, Dan Gallagher at gallaghertech.edublogs.org, Carlos Garza, Mr. G from the Aced Tech Podcast, Peggy George at pgeorge, Jeff Herb at Jeff Herb, Mr. Mike Messner at Messner_Mike, JP Prezavento at the Bits and Bytes of Education Podcast, jpprez.com, Lori Simpson at North L. Simpson, Kyle Wilcox at Level Up EdTech. If you are interested in becoming an awesome supporter, go to chrisnessy.com/awesome. The next episode of the House of Ed Tech will be episode number 167, and it will release on November 1st, 2020. Guys, I can't believe the next episode will be in November. That's incredible. This year is going by so fast, and yet so slow. It's one of those weird things, right? I don't know about you, but I'm having a blast. I'm really enjoying being here, and part of me is getting sad. I don't want my time to end here at the House of Ed Tech, but I've really enjoyed it. So thank you for being here with me. And until next time, thank you for learning with me. And remember, using technology isn't difficult. Just give it a try.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's me, Chris. Yes, I'm here, and I had to jump in because I wanted to share some really exciting news about the podcast. As you know, I've been podcasting since 2014, and I am really engrossed in the deep end of podcasting and creating content like this. And there's an industry magazine called, go figure, Podcast Magazine. And the October 2020 issue featured this very podcast, the House of Ed Tech, as an under-the-radar education podcast. And I'm super thankful to Podcast Magazine. I had no idea that they were going to feature the House of Ed Tech and do a little write-up about the show, but I just wanted to share that with you because you listen, you share, and because of that, people are aware of this podcast. And I just also want to let you know that my school year is going pretty well. I am as overwhelmed as I've ever been in my career, and I am doing my best to make it work. Again, teaching my kindergartner, my third grader, my high school students, and my college students. I've enjoyed connecting with people online, and I've enjoyed the growth of the House of Ed Tech Facebook group, and I'm looking forward to coming back for the final episode of the year, which I'm going to co-host with Derek. So again, get those submissions in by December 1st. It's our 2020 Smackdown. It's one of my favorite episodes that I do every year, and I want you to be a part of it. So figure out what your recommendation is, what you've loved in EdTech this year, and go out to chrisnessy.com/feedback. Send me a Voxer message, get it to me in audio, because as I like to say, if you send me an email, you take your chances with how I will do an impression of you. I hope you're also doing well. I miss you, and I'll see you guys real soon. Take care.